Brilliant. Welcome to the Writing Around the Kids podcast. Sorry, it's not, it's the panel. Welcome to the Writing Around the Kids panel. Writing Around the Kids is for mothers of young children to connect with writing creatively. We work in the Southeast with groups in Brighton, Crawley, Hastings and Littlehampton in partnership with New Writing South.
And Anna and I are both writers, and we recognised how difficult it can be in our own lives to fit in creative time around a family, but also recognising that it's not just families that get in the way, life can get in the way. So that's what we're bringing you a panel for this evening.
So my name's Anna Jefferson. I am a playwright and novelist. I've written for stage and screen since 2005. I've published 2 novels, Winging It and Nailing It, both published with Orion. And my 3rd novel, The List for Living, is out in January with Penguin Random House in Germany. And I'm currently working on my 4th novel.
My name's Sam Johnson. I'm a freelance writer. I have an MA in creative writing from Brighton University. And I've been facilitating creative writing workshops since 2017. I've got poetry published in 2 anthologies, and I've had work performed in the Brighton Fringe Festival, and I'm gradually working on my novel.
So welcome to the panel discussion. We've got 3 exceptional female writers who have kindly agreed to share with us their experiences of what it is to be a writer, and also to give us a short reading from their books. So I will get on and introduce our first writer. So first up we have Nicola Williams. Welcome, Nicola. Nicola is a part-time Crown Court judge, author, and sits on numerous boards as non-executive director. She has been listed as one of the 100 most influential Black people in the UK. After a successful career at the bar, including as a legal commentator on the OJ Simpson verdict, she served as an ombudsman both in the UK and internationally, including as a commissioner at the Independent Police Complaints Commission and as Complaints Commissioner for the Cayman Islands. She was the first Service Complaints Ombudsman for the UK Armed Forces and one of the most senior women and the most senior Black person in the UK Defence. She is author of the legal thriller Without Prejudice, describing the experiences of being a Black female lawyer in Britain, and is also an indictment of the legal system and privilege. Screen rights have been optioned, and her 2nd thriller, Until Proven Innocent, was published in March of this year by Penguin. Welcome, Nicola.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
And I'd also like to welcome Annie Garthwaite this evening. Hi, Annie.
Hello.
So Annie grew up in a working class community in the northeast of England. She studied English at the University of Wales before embarking on a 30-year career in international business, working with multinational companies and eventually establishing her own communications consultancy. In 2017, she studied for an MA in creative writing at Warwick University, and during 2 years of study wrote her debut novel, Cecily, which was published by Penguin in 2021. Cecily was named a top pick by The Times and Sunday Times and a best book of 2021 by independent bookshops and Waterstones. Her 2nd novel, The King's Mother, will publish in July 2024.
Thank you.
And lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Jacqueline Roy. Hi, Jackie.
Hello.
So Jacqueline was born and raised in London. Her father was Jamaican and her mother was English, and she comes from a family of writers. She hated the pressure to conform at school and left early, so she did her degrees as a mature student and moved to Manchester to take up full-time teaching post at Manchester Metropolitan University. She lectured in English for many years, specialising in post-colonial literatures. She also taught creative writing at MMU's Writing School. She is particularly interested in exploring racial identities and the way in which those that are marginalised find strategies for fighting back. She is now a full-time writer of fiction. She has written 6 books for children, published mainly by Penguin Children's Books and Walker Books, and 2 novels for adults. The Fat Lady Sings, that was republished by Penguin in 2021, and The Gosling Girl. And a 3rd novel for adults is to be published in 2025. Welcome, Jackie.
Hello. Thank you.
Okay, before we get started with more of the discussion side of the evening, we've invited all of our writers to give us a brief reading so that we get a flavour of their work. So Nicola, if we start with you, just give us a quick snapshot about what you're reading and then go for it.
Yes, well, thank you, everyone. I'm reading from my second book, Until Proven Innocent, and in short, it's about a Black British woman barrister who has really sort of toughed her way up to a very good chambers and really getting excellent work. But she's been forced into representing a bigoted, racist, homophobic white police officer who's accused of shooting a Black teenage boy, 15-year-old, in the face. And his father is it's the local pastor, but he's a sort of local community leader and civil rights leader. Lee doesn't want to take on the case. And this is I suppose, the showdown between her senior clerk, a chap called Tom Mannion, and her about forcing her to take on the case. Okay, so he's just about talking to her about having the case. He says, "Don't worry about that. The point is, Chambers hasn't got it. You have. Both the solicitor and the lay client want you to do it. Lambert from Miller Street, no way. I've only met him once, but I would have thought I'd be the last person he would want. He specifically asked for you. Wouldn't accept anyone else, not even Mr. Townsend, and believe me, he'd be very keen to do it." "I see," Lee said slowly. "I've never acted for him before, and out of everyone in the temple, he wants me, even turning down the head of chambers. Seems to me this is just about having a Black barrister. If so, he can find someone else." "You're not the only Black barrister around, Miss Mitchell. Everyone knows you're a fighter, even on hopeless cases. Maybe that's what he's counting on." "He better not count on that too much with me. I still know people who live near where it happened." "No, Miss Mitchell, I know you. If you took this on, your professional pride wouldn't let you screw it up. Nothing like someone with a point to prove. Believe me, I should know. Anyway, there's no sense in us having this discussion because I'm not doing it, whatever his reasons. I'm sure he won't have any problem getting adequate representation elsewhere. Besides, you know I don't need the work that badly. I've got back-to-back fixtures and trials lined up for months ahead." Lee took a sip of her coffee. "Who's the solicitor anyway?" Silence. "Brendan Donnelly." "What? Are you seriously asking me to accept instructions from him after all that happened? And are you seriously going to reject instructions from a solicitor on a major case because of something that happened over a year ago? What do you think? I can't work with someone I can't trust, Tom." "Why not? You work with me. And don't bother trying to deny you don't trust me. I don't care either way." "I wasn't going to, but that's different, Tom. You know it." Tom crossed his arms over his chest. "Let me speak frankly, Miss Mitchell. The problem with you barristers is that you think you run Chambers. You don't. I do. You also think you're bigger than Chambers, but Maple Court is more important than all of you. I've been here man and boy when it was just me and Mr. Townsend, and he didn't have a pot to piss in spite of all his airs and graces he has nowadays. My primary loyalty is to yourself," Lee interrupted. "No, it's to these chambers which I helped to build over any individual barrister. Luck had fuck all with getting this brief. I worked hard to get it here, and you were part of that deal. This kid's likely to croak too, so it might even be a murder trial. Jack Lambert potentially on trial for murdering a Black teenager. It's Stephen Lawrence with cops. Do you really think I'm going to let you turn this down?" "You're not going to let me do anything. I just won't allow myself to be used. End of." Lee paused before continuing. "If you're speaking to me like this, you must already think I've got one foot out the door. If so, I could walk out of here and into another chambers tomorrow. You know Devereux want me to join them. And just how long do you think that offer will be on the table if you're reported to the Bar Council for breaking the cab rank rule, refusing instructions that you are competent to accept? Think they'll want you then or anywhere else?" Lee stared at him. This was getting dirty. "And how are the Bar Council going to know? Are you going to tell them?" There was a long pause before Tom replied, "I'm sure that between them, Lambert and Donnelly are more than capable of working that out." "With a little help from you, you mean? Well, I'll take my chances." "Will you, Lee? Really? After the last time? You know, once before the Bar Council, that's unfortunate. Twice? That's a pattern, one that can seriously derail a career." Lee blinked. She didn't even think Tom would stoop this low. "You bastard, you know the reasons for that." "I wouldn't want the whole of the bar to know I'd had a nervous breakdown either, not when my career was well and truly on the rise. And you've got to know what the bar is like, more leaks than the sieve. Anything to get an advantage over the competition. A criminal brief who can't hack it, who cracks under pressure. How much high profile work do you think you'll get then? But Lee wasn't going down without a fight. I'll take it to Chambers Committee then. You think they'll keep on a clerk, even a senior clerk, who's trying to blackmail a member of Chambers? Who do you think they'll choose, Miss Mitchell? You or the person who makes sure they're in court every day? You'll never get enough support for that. You're not senior enough to have that kind of clout on your own, not yet. Plus, you've been so busy being independent, ploughing your own furrow, that you don't have a network of support. You've got one good friend here and she's on maternity leave. The law's a blood sport. People on the outside think it's so genteel just because barristers walk around in fancy dress and have posh voices, but they don't know the half of it. Queensberry rules my ass. They'll be dying to get a crack at your work. We both know that.
What nasty people.
Well, that's the bar for you.
Thank you, Nicola. That was fantastic. Annie, could we hear from you now, please?
Yes, I'm going to read from my novel, Cecily. Cecily is very different to what you've just heard. This is a novel that takes place in the 15th century, and it's about Cecily Neville, who was the matriarch of the House of York and the mother of Edward IV and Richard III. So I was thinking about what bit to read, and I was thinking of life-work balance and life-work-writing balance, and all of the things that women have to juggle, and very often motherhood as well as everything else. So I thought I'd read you a little bit from the moment when Cecily is preparing for the birth of her first child. And as all good medieval aristocratic women did, she goes into a very closed seclusion to have her baby. Her whole life, Cecily has chafed against confinement. Now, in the 3rd week of her lying in, she wants nothing more than to wait out these long summer days in the sheltered half-light of this curtained room. She was brought here straight from the church, shriven, blessed, absolved of sin. They led her back over summer fields, where the ring of scythes in the hay crop played counterpoint to the murmuring of priests who paced beside her, fore and aft, lining her way with prayer. Then under Fotheringay's towering barbican they brought her, through the halls and passages and stairways of the castle, to this room, which is her world now, until the child comes. At the threshold she hesitated, the priests fell back, and only Richard stood beside her. His face was pale, his gaze tender, but his fingers grasped hers tightly, and she knew it would hurt him to let her go. She looked to where her feet must take her, where her waiting women moved like shadows in the dim, and at the bed where she will labour, pillow-laden, canopied, and wide. Wait, he said, and turned to take from a servant's arm a drape of soft white wool. His hands unfolded it, and there, harnessed with silver and seeded with pearl, was a girdle, corded, thin with age. I begged loan of it from Westminster, from the Abbey, for you. She knew then what it was. He gave into her hands the girdle Christ's mother wore when she delivered, that fell from her hips as she ascended to heaven, that was caught in the waiting arms of Thomas, the disciple who doubted. It has rested in England 1,000 years. It is the comfort of queens in childbed. It is his prayer for her preservation. She wondered how he had convinced the monks to lend it, how long he had petitioned, how rich had been his gift of alms. She held it against her face and breathed its age. I will come back to you, she told him. His lips were firm upon her brow. I will wait.
So beautiful. So yeah, then finally, we'd love to hear from you, Jackie. You're gonna read for us from Gosling Girl.
I am. The Gosling Girl is the story of Michelle Cameron, who is a dual heritage girl. And when she was 10 years old, she killed a much younger white child. And the novel is about the consequences of this for her, which really are going to carry on for the rest of her life pretty much. So I'm going to read from the opening of the novel. Everything is strange. She's been accustomed to rules, doing things when other people thought she should. Inside, there were rules about when to eat, who to eat with, when to get up, when the lights went out. Showers, not baths, and only a few minutes before they made you get out. You never thought about it. You did what you were told. It was just the way it was. But she's outside now, and there are endless choices to be made. She stays in bed for hours every morning, partly because she can, and partly because she's afraid to get up. So many things she could do with her time that she's too scared to do anything. What if she makes the wrong choices? Has a bath when she should have had a shower, wears shoes when she should have worn sandals, goes out when she should have stayed indoors. She can walk or travel by tube or get on a bus. She stands on the street beneath her block and watches the traffic. Frantic drivers hooting their way past, cyclists hurling through the smallest of gaps between pavement and car, death wish inscribed in the furious pedaling of their feet. Air thick with fumes, mothers with pushchairs ramming through crowds, children shouting and jostling their way to school. A cacophony of rage mingles with the smell of eggs and bacon from the cafe on the corner, dizzying her senses until she can't tell touch from taste or sight from sound. At first, outside, unaccompanied, she fears that if she goes too far, she'll slide off the edges of the world. There is a rug on the floor in her bedroom, with dark, shiny patches of chewing gum embedded in its fibers. She stands barefoot, feeling its softness, luxurious and alien. In the bathroom, she stores rolls of cushioned toilet paper in fulfillment of a promise she made herself that when she got out, she'd buy an endless supply. She still hasn't used it, not a single sheet. The cheap stuff, thin and coarse, creates the sense of familiar that she craves. If freedom has a single sense, it's taste. Chocolate, any brand she wants. She buys Swiss bars, melting smooth, popcorn, sweet and salty in a single bag. Tang fastics because their sharpness makes her tongue curl. The Aldi version of Ferrero Rocher, 2 big boxes at a time. Suck the chocolate, crunch the nutty bits, ignore the churning of your stomach and the bloating when you've had enough but still can't seem to stop. These are choices she can deal with. Porridge or cornflakes, crisps or chips, she knows without thinking which to have.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, all three of you. It's a real honour to hear you reading your books. So yes, we're now going to get on to the matter of asking you some questions and finding all about you and your writing process. I should say to anybody who is watching, if you have questions as well, we have questions to ask of our writers, but we'd also welcome you to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll come to them as we go along. So please do. So just to get us kind of warmed up for some questions, just going to have a quick fire round, asking each of you if you could have a conversation with any writer, either living or dead, who would it be and why? And Nicola, I'll start with you.
Okay. Shakespeare, I think. Not like it's I love the way that he writes. I mean, people say that maybe he didn't write everything that he did, but assuming that he did, to write it's such a range. I would really love to speak to him about that. It also has a bit of a family connection for me, because it was something that my mum and I, we like to go and watch Shakespeare plays. So it's a bit of both of those things.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Annie, how's about you? Who would your writer be?
Hilary Mantel. For two reasons, but really. First, because every word that comes out of her mouth is a complete pearl. And secondly, because I did meet her once and spoke to her, and I was so gushy. I was so embarrassed afterwards that I'd quite like to talk to her again and convince her that I'm a sane and normal human being.
So you're going to have like a really kind of cool, chill drink with her.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, in which I will not gush.
Absolutely. Got it. And Jackie, how about you?
There's a writer, I don't know if anyone knows his work, but his name's David Dabydeen, and he's a Caribbean writer, and he's both a poet and a novelist. And I admire his work hugely because he really pushes boundaries, both in terms of form and the language that he uses, and also in terms of content. He for example, wrote in his novel A Harlot's Progress about the slave trade. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to write about because of the trauma and the horrors of the slave trade. And he devised some really interesting strategies to do it. He uses a kind of heightened, almost hallucinogenic language for it. And I'd really like to talk to him more about what's behind his writing and what he aims to do with it. And he's so underrated. I'd really like him to be better known by people as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've done quite a few of these panels now, and we have the podcast as well. So we know that writers all kind of operate in slightly different ways. But have you got kind of a ritual that you need to do before you start writing, or maybe what's the first thing you do when you sit down to write? We'll start with you, Jackie, please, on that.
Right, before I write, I think I offer up a prayer, but I don't believe in God, so it's really futile. But that's how it feels, it feels like you need to call on whatever deity might exist, because it's such, for me, it's quite a scary process. And what I find is it's different depending on what stage I'm at with a book. So if it's a first draft, the deities definitely need to be called upon. But if I'm redrafting, then I can really relax in it and feel I've got something, and it's just a question of reworking. And I feel a lot kind of more relaxed and confident and happier about that. So, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And Annie?
I always start, well, the one thing I've got to do before I sit down to write is drink about a gallon of tea to get me going. But I always start my writing day by reading whatever I wrote yesterday. And that usually means I end up reworking what I wrote yesterday, but then carrying on from there. Do you know what I mean? So to get me back into the flow. So that's how I usually begin. And I really sympathize with you, Jackie, that feeling of praying to a God that isn't there and isn't listening. I think many writers probably feel that, don't they? That it's just, there is nothing between your imagination and the page or the screen, and all of it has to come out of you. It's quite a pressure.
Calling on the muse to arrive. Nicola, how about you?
Well, my process has changed from when I wrote my first book to the second one. I'm a very nocturnal person, so I used to write between midnight and 4 in the morning. And now I write in the mornings between 9 and 12. There must be a prayer theme going on here, because I do pray before I start. But I have to have coffee, write with a certain type of pen. I write longhand and then I type it up, and it's very labor intensive, but it's the only way that kind of works for me. And then I hopefully, if I hit my word count, I'll feel satisfied. And if I don't, I'll go and flagellate myself. So
So
Nicola, when you were working between 12 and 4, when did you sleep?
Between 4 and 8. And I did that for 9 months to a year. So it's really interesting to be talking about this being writing around the kids, because I've never been pregnant, but in many ways, I see that as a, not as painful as giving birth, but certainly that 9 months to a year, that was a proper labor. And I'd have to go to court the next day as well. I don't know how I did it. That's why there was a long gap in between books. So
amazing.
Did you have to, I mean, how did you switch, or how do you all switch as well? But to start with you, Nicola, from when you're balancing that work and writing, and with the example that you've given for a real commitment to writing into the early hours, then sleeping, and then working, a very different job. How do you make those two bits work?
Well, honestly, I look back on it now and I have absolutely no idea. I think the only thing I will say is I was a lot younger for a start, and that if you really, really, really want to do something, somehow you will just make it work. But I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. I wouldn't advise anyone to survive on 4 hours sleep for the best part of a year. I absolutely wouldn't advise anyone to do that. And when I started writing again, I knew I couldn't do that again. So I had to rejig my other working life in order to let me write during like sensible hours, like in the mornings. So that's what I do now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a kind of imperative, isn't there, about writing, if you're really serious about it, that you kind of can't ignore. I certainly feel it's so important to me that I've just got to do it. So you do end up making time somehow when something's that important to you. And very often, like you, Nicola, I found I wasn't sleeping. I'm finding that at the moment. And I keep saying to myself, you've got to be more sensible. You've got to, not work until 2 in the morning or whatever it is. But it's actually really difficult if the ideas are there then, because they might not be there tomorrow. It's like you can't afford to miss them. So you can get very caught up in doing things that aren't necessarily good for health. So what I find I need to do is make sure that I then take breaks. It's interesting because in a way the writing tells me when I need to take breaks, because I get stuck and I can't write anything. And then I know I've got to take some time and step back from it.
Yeah. I always try to, because I don't have another job anymore, happily. So I try and be really disciplined about writing and treat it like a job. So, I hit the desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and I don't leave until 5 or 6 in the evening, and, office hours type thing. But that's the sort of rule I make for myself. But I'm about as good at that as I was when I was working full time and running my own business. And I'd often be working all hours of the night and working at weekends. So I've made that sort of 9 to 5 rule for myself, but I lapse from it fairly often, which is a shame. Yeah.
I mean, both you and Nicola have mentioned word counts. Is that what you aim for, to produce a certain number of words each day?
I don't know. No.
You don't, Annie?
No. If there's some days I'll get to the end of the day and I'll have written, a couple of thousand words and I'll think that's fantastic. And sometimes I'll get to the end of the day and I've written a couple of sentences. But if they're sentences I'm happy with, that's good. And my writing, I guess, because it's historical, is very research heavy. So, and I'm doing a lot of research as I go, as well as the sort of preparatory research before the project begins. So sometimes I'll spend, a lot of the day doing research and very little writing, and then the next day much more writing and less research. So it just varies too much, and that sort of imposition of a word count would frighten me. I think it would make me feel like I've just got to get words down, whereas I want to concentrate on getting the right words down.
That's what I was going to say, because you talked about before about maybe starting by editing stuff that you'd done the day before. So I guess you're not a fan of like the dirty first draft. Then it's very much as you go for you.
Yeah, I can't do dirty first draft. No,
I have to say I can't. I'm different to Annie in that I like to have, I need to know how long it's going to take me to do a first draft. So I need to have an aim. And I don't have a high word count I need to do every day, but I need to have something to aim for. But what I do have is a really detailed outline. So it works almost as a scaffolding. So if I'm kind of losing it a little bit, sometimes I do what Jackie does, and I just stop, because if your brain isn't functioning, then you can't really push through that. But sometimes I just need to go away, have a coffee, have a look at it, and I know where to pick it up again. And then after a while, some days are better than others. Some days you can hit your work out easily, and other days you just look at that page and it's like, what do I have to do? Do I have to open a vein in order to bleed on the page in order to get something going? So, you know, you have your up and downs, but for me, that structure really helps me.
So you think of that, you know, the structure of your story.
Yes.
Kind of that before you start writing.
I do.
Yes,
I do.
Annie, you've got the historical framework to be able to work within. Jackie, what's your process before you start putting pen to paper?
I start with character first and foremost. So usually there's a character in my head that I really want to work with, and the plot comes out of that character, their personality and their thoughts and their feelings. And so the first draft is quite chaotic. Sometimes there have been times when I've only kept 10 pages of a first draft. Everything else has just gone, and then I've start again. That's okay. That's part of the process for me. So I think one of the things that I've learned over the years is not to panic, and not to think, because I've lost what feels like the whole book, that's it, and I'm not going to produce anything. It's actually how I work, so I just have to go with it.
Trust yourself.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that only comes either with age or experience, or both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there are two writers alive who have the same process, do you?
That's true. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Everybody is different. And that's good, because it means, because we all write different things, and even if you write in the same genre, you're going to have a different perspective on it. So yeah, I think that's good. But I always like to hear other people's processes.
Yeah, and to marvel at them sometimes.
Yeah.
I had a tutor at Warwick who told me that she would write her first draft and she would throw it away.
Oh, crumbs.
And I'd say, you don't mean that. You mean you put it in another folder somewhere else while you're kind. She said, no, I delete.
You.
That makes me
That just did my head in. That just makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Just while we're talking about kind of throwing away a draft, we had a question that Tracy said that she'd be interested to hear if any of you had written a novel and then put it away for a while and then come back to it and cut it up and reshaped it, or if kind of once you put it into the drawer, then you needed to move on to a new project.
Well, I can tell you my experience with that. I mean, there's 25 years in between my two books, and the second time, that was not intended, but the second time around, I was working on the genesis of Until Proven Innocent. I had burning in my brain for about 15 years, and it wouldn't leave me alone. The idea just would not leave me alone. It was called The Advocate's Devil at the time, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And then I put it away, and I took it out during the first lockdown. And I thought, there's the bones of something good here. And also I thought, I'm tired of feeling like crap about myself. I was going to use a stronger word, but anyway, I was tired of feeling like crap about myself, and I need to finish this. And even if no one else sees it, and at the time I didn't think anyone would, at least I would have done it. So yeah, I did take it out, looked at it, thought, this works, that doesn't, cut it up, put it back together again, and carried on with the bones of it.
Yeah, I did something similar with the Gosling Girl, in that I started it while I was working full time, and I just couldn't give it the attention that it needed. It was just impossible. So I ended up just having to put it away, because it was so frustrating not to be able to do it in the way that I wanted to, because of pressure of time. So when I was able to leave work and write full time, I went back to it, and it was always my intention to do that. I just couldn't wait to leave full time work and get writing again. And that was great. It just freed me up so much to do the writing that I wanted to do. So, and I know that's a huge luxury to have. Most people aren't in that position. So I really, I can't tell you how much I value having the time to write now. It's just been amazing.
I'm also really reassured by what you said earlier, Jackie, about writing your first draft, and then that sometimes just being like something where it might go back to a very small word count afterwards, because I've recently done that myself, gone from 100,000 words to no words to 60,000 words, and I'm back down to 12 now, and to hear you say that is hugely reassuring. And I was just thinking what we were talking about commitment to an idea. So Nicola, you'd said about having that story wouldn't leave you alone for 15 years, and Jackie, you said about once you were at a point where you could concentrate wholly on your writing. I was just thinking, Annie, I know with you, with Cecily, this has been a kind of a lifelong love affair with her, hasn't it? Almost?
Yeah, since I was in my teens.
Because you had to shelve the practical writing of it for some time, but you kept with but like the story was still there throughout, wasn't it? Until I'm trying to tell the story. You tell me.
Yeah. No, I've been interested in her since I was a teenager, and then in my early 20s, I really wanted to write the novel, but life. So I promised myself, I went into business to earn a living, and I promised myself that when I was 55, I would give up the day job and write the book, which felt like a really long time to wait. So, and that's exactly what I did. But in the interim period, I was writing other bits of things, just sort of to keep my hand in, I suppose. And then at one point in my early 40s, I got quite desperate. So I took myself off and did a very part-time BA in creative writing, which took 6 years. It was really part-time. And I experimented with a few chapters of Cecily then. So they kind of went into the sock drawer, and then were pulled out when the 55 date finally rolled around and I started writing proper. But oddly, I don't think there's more than a couple of sentences. So I probably in that time wrote probably, 10,000 words or something like that. I don't think there's more than a couple of sentences of that actually made it into the finished novel. But yeah, it was a long-term commitment.
Yeah, I think people often don't realize how often that happens with writing, because I used to teach creative writing, and students used to be really surprised about the drafting process. They hadn't realized that that's what most writers, if not all writers really, through editors, end up doing. So and a friend of mine recently looked at my laptop. I was sharing something with her, and she looked at all the different folders I'd got for a single book, and she said, "Oh my goodness, how on earth do you find? How do you sort all of this?" And it really is part of the process, I think, to have lots and lots of drafts. If you have a real commitment to writing, you want to get it right, and it's very difficult to get it right first time. And I think certainly the best writing I do comes through drafting. It's not there straight away.
Yeah, and I sort of draft as I go. So my folders are weird because there'll be like multiple drafts of a single chapter, and I might redraft a chapter 12, 15 or more times before I move on to the next chapter. So it's very labor intensive and it's very ploddy, but it gets there in the end.
It works.
Because I write longhand, when I consider that to be, for every chapter I write longhand, and then that's my first draft, and then I type it up and I change it when it's typed up, and that would be my second draft, if you like, whilst I'm going along, and then I read it out loud to just see if it has the right flow, and then I'll get to like a chunk altogether and then read it. And so all the time throughout the process, it's been changed all the time. And it's amazing how it feels like an organic thing, that it has a life of its own almost. Yeah, it's kind of scary in some ways. So yeah.
Somebody said to me once, "When do you know a book's finished?" really finished. I said, well, you don't until
Don't.
it goes to the printer.
Yeah.
Then it has to be finished.
Yeah.
Up until then, it's still changing, isn't it?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the temptation, I think, if you're not careful, is to keep trying to perfect it because you've got to go somewhere. So part of it, I think, is knowing when to stop. So I find deadlines quite useful for that, because you just have to finish eventually. So is that the case for either of you?
Yes, but I have to say, the last time I missed my last deadline, so I got an extension on that one. But certainly for the book that I'm working on now, which would be the third one, but Until Proven Innocent, yeah, that really did help to have those deadlines and be kept quite tightly to them, because you can go on, and I do know I have that tendency in myself to be a bit of a perfectionist, and you could end up sort of like, I don't know, polishing the same thing over and over again, and then when does it actually get finished? So yeah.
So if you haven't, if you're not in that far along and you haven't got an editor and you haven't got deadlines imposed in that way, for people that were kind of newer to the process and they wanted to submit their work, for them, how do you think they know that it's finished? Or what would you advise on that?
I think I'd advise to make something the best that you think you can possibly make it.
Yes.
And that's and it's really hard to know when to stop, but I also think there's a kind of excitement as well when you start out writing. So you do want to get it off to an editor or an agent, don't you? And I think in a way that stops it getting polished and polished and polished. But I do think it's really necessary for it to be as good as it can be, because agents are very selective and they won't take things unless they really feel they have potential. So if you haven't fulfilled your own potential, you're not really going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of writers say, oh, I know it's not quite there yet, but my agent will help me or my editor will help me. And I think, no, unless you think it is there, don't send it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so do I.
I absolutely agree. And I totally agree with both Jackie and Annie. It has to be the best. You have to be proud to put your name to it. So it has to be the best that you can possibly get it. And if you are happy with it, even if it might need to be changed or edited, at least fundamentally you did the best that you could with it. And that's the time that it should go out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that as well, thinking it's the best that you can do yourself, would you also recommend that somebody else reads it before you send it off?
I think that's really difficult. It depends who you choose.
Yeah.
Yes,
that's a follow-up question. Do you have trusted people that you share your work to before you kind of put it a bit more out in the world?
I don't.
Yeah.
So
I think it's so difficult sharing it with friends and family, because they are always going to tell you it's great, aren't they? Almost invariably. So I'm not sure how helpful that is always. But I do have a friend who is also a writer and very hard on herself and very hard on me. So that helps.
I have to say, I have shared it with people in the past, but it's instinctively not something I feel comfortable doing. And it's nothing to do with the people I share it with. That's more on me. I just want to keep it very close. It's hard enough when your editor sees it and then they say, well, we like it, but what about this, and this? And you think, what the hell? This is my book. What are you doing? So that's hard enough without it going to somebody else. So, but that's just more my nature to be a little the sort of introvert that I am. That's what that's about.
I think it varies hugely, because I'm like you, Nicola, I don't share, but I also have friends who absolutely do, because it's a very kind of isolating process, isn't it, writing? And sometimes it's useful to have a writers group, for example, and they can really benefit people. And I'd really recommend that for people who are starting out, because it's very hard to know when something's good when you start. And if you're getting lots of positive feedback, that's great. But equally, if people are saying you may need to change the pace, or that character doesn't quite work, or whatever the feedback is, I think it's important to listen to that, because most books, if not all, improve through advice from people. They just do. So make it the best that you possibly can. Listen to people. Don't necessarily take on that advice if it doesn't suit you. If you think, no, actually, that's not right for my book. But if you have a thought in your head that goes, might have a point there, then, you know, really think about it and try and engage with the criticism rather than just kind of shutting down from it.
Yeah.
And I think dealing with the criticism, especially in sort of writing groups, is quite tricky, because if you don't have a strong sense yourself of where the piece is going, what you want it to be, what you want to say with it, I think it's very easy for critiques, particularly group critiques, to throw you completely off course. Because you get so much random feedback that you don't quite know how to respond to it. But I think if you have a very strong sense of where you're going and what you want to achieve with the thing, then that gives you a sort of toehold in order to judge people's responses, because you've got to look at every response that someone gives you and think, is that going to help me achieve my vision? Is that going to make the book I'm trying to write better? Rather than rather than just, have you thought of writing it backwards? That sort of thing. So I think you need a very strong stake in the ground about where you're going before you start soliciting feedback from lots of people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you need I wouldn't say a sturdy sense of self, because, if only people with sturdy senses of selves wrote, I think we wouldn't get I think at least half the books that are written wouldn't have been written. But you need to kind of have faith in your ability as a writer to produce something good, because someone could give you useful feedback, but perhaps not delivered in a very helpful way. And other people can give you feedback which, quite frankly, is not helpful. And you don't want to take that on board and let it doubt your ability to write if you believe in what you're doing.
So kind of what you're both saying is that you need a certain level of confidence in order to write and to produce something that ultimately you'll be happy with. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, I think you need to be a little bit of a schizophrenic, because you need the confidence to believe that you've got the skill or the ability or the interesting things to say, that you could put words on a page and people will want to read it. That's a really arrogant thing to think, isn't it, really, about yourself? But at the same time, you've got to be really humble. You've got to have the humility to take criticism.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance, I think, a really difficult balance.
It really
but
is.
I think if you're a new writer, you might really want to write, but you haven't fully reached that point where you believe in your work as yet. And then if you, depending on the criticism, that can really derail you. Next thing you know, you haven't written for 5 years. So you don't, I mean, that wasn't the reason why I didn't write. It's just that I couldn't do that 4 hours sleep a night thing anymore. But you can have people who, depending on what someone says, even if they don't mean it unkindly, could really just veer them off their path. So yeah, you do have to be kind of careful with that, I think.
You need to kind of choose those people who are your inner circle.
Yeah. And they may not see your vision. You have a vision for what you want to write, and they may not see it. And if they can't see it, then with the best will in the world, I don't think what they say is going to be very helpful to you. So
Exactly.
I mean, one of the things that happened to me when I started out as a writer was the book went to, this was when you could send books directly to publishers, which doesn't happen anymore. You have to have an agent. But I sent one of my early pieces of writing to 2 different publishers. And the feedback from one was that the book was melodramatic. But the feedback from the other one was that it was so low key and understated, it was bland. Now, it can't have been both. So you really have to, I think, stay with your gut feeling as well with your writing, and have some element of confidence so that you can sift through the criticism and recognize what's appropriate and what fits what you're doing and what doesn't.
Exactly.
Yes, indeed.
Have you got a tip that would help you with building that resilience as well for having the knockbacks?
Oh, not really. I mean, I think keep going is the only thing that I felt I could do. So, and no matter what was said to me in response to my writing, I just thought you've just got to keep doing it because it's too important to you not to. And that's all really.
And when you started on your writing journey, was it for you all, was the end game always that you wanted to be a published author, or were you writing for the love of writing and then your kind of novel came from that? How did your writing journey begin? Like where did you see it was going to, where did you want it to end when you started?
Well, for me, I just had, I said that with Until Proven Innocent, I had this idea it was burning a hole inside of me. Now I think about it, it happened with my first book as well. And it must have done because, if you're a full-time practice, you've got to try and work out how you're going to carve out the time to do it. It has to be because there's something that's really driving you to do it. And at the time, I didn't know, I thought what I was writing was good, but lots of people write good things and they don't know if they're going to get published. So it was really, I had to get this thing out of me and onto a page. That was what it was for me.
Yeah. I think for me, it was very much to do with wanting to have a voice. I spent, I had a lot of problems when I was an adolescent in particular, and they kind of continued right up until, my late 20s. And one of the things that happened, because I have a psychiatric history, is that you don't have a voice. You end up being silenced by a lot of people. So for me to write was a way of having a voice and trying to counter some of the injustices that I saw going on, which I know had led in part to some of the things that happened to me. So I think when you want to have a voice, you want as many people to hear that voice as possible. So for me, having a voice was a kind of resistance. It was a way of fighting back, if you like. So I think for me, certainly when, I wrote as a child, and of course you just write for fun then, and into adolescence it was for fun. But when I realized how important a voice was, then it became really serious for me, and I knew that I had to try and get my writing published. But it was, I don't know that I would recommend being focused on publication to people, because it's so hit or miss, and there is an element of luck in it. There just is. We all like to pretend that it's purely based on talent, and that if you're talented enough, you get published. But I know a lot of talented writers who have never been published. So, you just have to really believe that you have a story to tell and want to tell it, and hope for the best when you're writing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think I always knew that, I had a story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to sort of rescue this woman who'd been almost written out of history, and give her a voice, I guess, if you like. So if I was going to do that, then that meant that the story had to go beyond me. It had to go out into the world. So I think the idea of being published was always there, right from the beginning of starting to write it. So as much as I sort of told myself, Annie, it'll probably never happen, and you just have to be satisfied with writing this for you, yeah, right,
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time. I think we could probably carry on with, these chats well into the night. But
okay.
So thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. If there was anyone who asked a question that we didn't get to, if you can email it to us, then we can try and get responses for you on those. But thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to our sponsors. That's not quite right. Thank you to the Arts Council for funding us, and for our partner, New Writing South.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Nicola. It's been lovely hearing about your writing. It's been really a treat. Thank you.
I'm really glad that I shared this panel with you two as writers, and also with Anna and Sam. So
Yeah.
I know it's going to sound a bit like a love-in, however, we're thanking each other, but it's true. It's nice. Some panels are nicer than others. So
and on that, I just want to finish on a one of the our listeners who has been watching Tracy has said, "I'm very inspired to get back on track with the redraft and voice my vision and fight. Thank you all." So I think that
good. That's
how,
good.
how brilliant you all are.
Good.
Job done then.
Job done.
So we'll have a couple more panels coming up in the new year. So if everyone keeps their eyes peeled for our social media to stay in the loop with those. But thanks for coming, and thank you to our fabulous guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.